The first thing Ethan Blackwood noticed wasn't that the expensive silver watch had disappeared. It was that his new housekeeper never even looked at it. The watch sat on the polished marble table in the center of the grand foyer, a limited edition timepiece worth more than most people earned in a year. Every previous employee had at least glanced at it. Some admired it. One had quietly slipped it into a pocket before security caught him. But this woman? She dusted around it with gentle care, smiled to herself as if remembering an old song, and continued working without the slightest hesitation. That was the exact moment Ethan realized she was different. Different enough to make him curious. Different enough to change his life forever. Before we continue this unforgettable story, take a second to help our growing family. Please like this video, share it with someone who believes kindness still exists, and subscribe to Kindness of Power for more emotional stories that touch the heart. And don't forget to leave a comment telling us which city and country you're watching from. We love seeing where our amazing viewers are joining us from. Ethan Blackwood had everything money could buy. At only 43 years old, he owned one of the largest technology companies in the country. His mansion overlooked the ocean. His garage housed luxury cars worth millions, and newspapers constantly called him one of the most successful businessmen of his generation. Yet every evening, his enormous home echoed with silence. His wife had died 5 years earlier after a long battle with cancer. They had never had children. Since then, Ethan trusted almost no one. He believed everyone wanted something from him. Employees wanted promotions. Relatives wanted money. Business partners wanted influence. Even strangers recognized him and hoped for favors. His wealth had built walls far stronger than the stone surrounding his estate. So when his longtime housekeeper retired, Ethan hired a replacement through an agency, but not before creating one unusual condition. He secretly tested every employee. Not because he enjoyed humiliating people, because experience had taught him that appearances could be deceiving. Some people smiled while stealing, others lied with incredible confidence. He had learned that trust was more valuable than gold. The agency recommended a woman named Clara Bennett. She was 62 years old. She had kind gray eyes, neatly tied silver hair, and hands marked by decades of honest work. Her resume wasn't impressive. She had cleaned schools, cared for elderly couples, and worked in small family homes. Nothing about her suggested she'd fit into one of the city's most luxurious mansions. Still, something about her calm smile convinced Ethan to give her a chance. On her first morning, she arrived 15 minutes early. She greeted every security guard by name after introducing herself. She thanked the gardener for opening the gate. She even complimented the chef's homemade bread before beginning her duties. The staff immediately liked her. Ethan remained skeptical. Kindness could be an act. His first test was simple. He deliberately left $200 beneath a decorative vase in the living room. When Clara dusted the shelves, she discovered the money. Instead of keeping it or pretending not to notice, she walked directly to Ethan's office. "Sir," she said softly, "you may have dropped this." She placed every bill neatly on his desk. Ethan nodded. "Thank you." Nothing more. She smiled politely and returned to work. Most people would have expected praise. She seemed to need none. The next day, Ethan made the test harder. He placed several expensive gold coins inside an unlocked drawer he instructed Clara to organize. Hours later, everything had been sorted perfectly. The coins rested exactly where he had left them, untouched. Interesting, Ethan thought. Very interesting. But honesty alone wasn't enough. He needed to know how people behaved when no one was watching. A week later, another opportunity arrived unexpectedly. One afternoon, Ethan overheard 2 young employees whispering in the kitchen. They laughed cruelly about Clara's worn shoes. "She looks like she belongs in a thrift store. I can't believe she's working in a mansion dressed like that." Neither realized Clara had quietly entered through the back hallway. She heard every word. Ethan watched from around the corner, expecting embarrassment. perhaps anger. Instead, Clara simply smiled. She approached them carrying a tray of fresh tea. "I hope your day gets easier," she said gently. Sometimes people only speak harshly when life has been harsh to them. The room became painfully silent. The two employees couldn't even meet her eyes. Later that evening, Ethan asked her, "Didn't their comments upset you?" Clara looked out the kitchen window before answering. "My mother used to say that wounded hearts often wound others. I've spent too much of my life healing to start collecting new scars." Her answer stayed with Ethan long after she left. Days became weeks. Something strange began happening inside the mansion. The atmosphere changed. The security guards smiled more often. The chef started preparing extra food for the homeless shelter because Clara volunteered every Saturday. The gardeners laughed while working. Even Ethan noticed himself eating dinner in the dining room instead of alone in his office. One rainy afternoon, he looked through the security cameras out of habit. He saw Clara standing near the front gate. A shivering stray dog stood outside, soaked by the storm. Security regulations strictly prohibited animals inside the property. Without hesitation, Clara removed her own warm sweater. She wrapped it around the trembling dog before sitting beside it under the covered entrance until animal rescue arrived. She never asked permission. She never asked for recognition. She simply couldn't ignore suffering. Ethan replayed the footage 3 times. That evening, he found her folding laundry. "You'll catch a cold." She smiled. The dog was already cold. He didn't know how to respond. For the first time in years, someone had reminded him that compassion didn't calculate costs. Still, old habits die slowly. Part of Ethan believed everyone eventually revealed selfish intentions. It was only a matter of time. Then came the biggest test of all. Before leaving on a 3-day business trip, Ethan intentionally placed an envelope containing $50,000 inside the library. He left the safe unlocked. The security cameras in that room were secretly disabled. No recordings, no witnesses, only Clara. If she took even $1, no one would know, except Ethan. As his private jet lifted into the clouds, he felt strangely uneasy. Not because of the money, but because, for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself hoping she wouldn't disappoint him. Far below, inside the quiet mansion, Clara entered the library carrying fresh flowers. She noticed the open safe. She noticed the thick envelope. She stood perfectly still. Then, instead of touching the money, she did something Ethan never could have imagined. Something that would force the lonely millionaire to question everything he believed about wealth, trust, and the true meaning of kindness. And when Ethan returned home 3 days later, the mansion and his heart would never be the same again. Clara stood in the silent library, staring at the open safe. The thick envelope rested inside, untouched. Anyone else might have looked at it and seen an opportunity. She saw something else entirely, a cry for help, not because the money was there, but because it had been left so carelessly by a man who trusted no one enough to believe it would still be there when he returned. Slowly, Clara closed the safe door. She didn't lock it. Instead, she walked through the mansion until she found Ethan's personal study. On the desk sat a small leather notebook where he often wrote reminders. She took a blank sheet of paper and carefully wrote, "Mr. Blackwood, I noticed your safe was left open. I didn't want to touch anything that wasn't mine, so I simply closed the door to protect your belongings. I hope you have a safe trip." She signed only her first name. Then she placed the note neatly beside the safe and continued with her work. For her, the matter was over. But fate had other plans. That afternoon, while cleaning the upstairs hallway, Clara heard shouting from outside the front gate. She hurried toward the entrance. A young boy, no older than 12, stood crying beside his bicycle. His younger sister was slumped against him, pale and barely conscious. "Our grandmother collapsed," the boy cried. "The ambulance is taking too long." "We don't know what to do." The security guards hesitated. They weren't allowed to let strangers onto the property. Without wasting a second, Clara made a decision. She invited them into the front courtyard to get out of the scorching heat. She gave the children water while asking one guard to call emergency services. Again. Then she remembered something. Ethan's luxury SUV sat in the garage. She knew she wasn't authorized to use it, but she also knew every minute mattered. Looking at the frightened children, she whispered, "Some rules exist to protect people. Others must be broken to save them." She asked the head of security for the spare keys. He refused. "If Mr. Blackwood finds out, we'll lose our jobs." Clara looked him in the eyes. "If someone's life is lost because we were afraid, we'll lose something much greater." Her calm conviction broke through his fear. Together, they drove the children to their nearby neighborhood, where paramedics were finally treating the elderly woman. Because they arrived with water, blankets, and first aid supplies from the mansion, the grandmother stabilized before reaching the hospital. The doctors later said those first few minutes had made a tremendous difference. When Clara returned, she quietly parked the SUV exactly where it had been. She washed it, refilled the fuel, and went back to polishing the dining room windows as though nothing unusual had happened. 3 days later, Ethan returned. His first stop was the library. The envelope containing $50,000 was exactly where he had left it. Every single bill remained untouched. Then, he noticed Clara's handwritten note. He read it twice. Something tightened in his chest. No one had ever treated his possessions with such quiet respect. Still curious, he reviewed security reports from the days he had been away. That was when he learned about the emergency. His face darkened. "Call Clara to my office." Moments later, she knocked gently. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Ethan held up the vehicle log. "You drove my SUV." "Yes." "You knew you didn't have permission." "I did." "And yet you did it anyway?" "I did." Her voice never shook. Ethan stared at her. "Why?" Clara didn't defend herself. She didn't beg to keep her job. She simply answered, "Because 2 children needed help, and their grandmother needed a chance to live. If I had to choose again between your car and someone's life," she paused, "I would make the same choice." Silence filled the room. Ethan expected excuses. Instead, he found courage. He walked to the large window overlooking the ocean. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan asked quietly, "Do you know why I kept testing you?" Clara smiled gently. "I suspected you were." "You knew?" "I've cleaned houses for over 40 years. I've learned that sometimes people don't test honesty because they doubt. Others, they test honesty because life has taught them to doubt themselves." Those words struck Ethan harder than any business loss ever had. His voice became almost a whisper. "My wife used to say something very similar." For the first time in years, he told someone the truth. He spoke about losing his wife, about eating dinner alone, about pretending success could replace love, about the fear that everyone who entered his life only saw his bank account. When he finished, Clara quietly said, "Money can build a beautiful house, but only kindness makes it a home." Tears filled Ethan's eyes, not dramatic tears, the quiet kind that appear after carrying pain for far too long. The following Monday, Ethan surprised every employee. He gathered the entire staff in the mansion's grand hall. "I owe someone an apology," he began. "I believed trust had to be earned through secret tests." He looked toward Clara. "But I've learned that true character reveals itself through everyday choices, especially when no one is watching." He turned to Clara. "You didn't just protect my home. You reminded me what a home is supposed to feel like." Then, in front of everyone, he handed her a small envelope. Inside was not cash. It was the deed to a cozy little cottage, surrounded by flowers just outside the city. Clara's hands trembled. "I can't accept this," Ethan smiled. "You're not accepting charity. You're accepting gratitude. And before you refuse," he handed her another document. It established a charitable foundation in memory of his late wife, a foundation dedicated to helping elderly caregivers, struggling families, and children in medical emergencies. I'd like you to help lead it." Clara looked up, overwhelmed. "Why me?" "Because," Ethan replied, "you've shown me that kindness is the greatest qualification anyone can have." Months passed. The foundation transformed hundreds of lives. Families received emergency assistance. Caregivers found support. Children obtained life-saving medical treatment. Every employee at the mansion volunteered, at least once a month. The grand estate that had once felt cold and empty became a place filled with laughter, hope, and purpose. Visitors often wondered what had inspired such extraordinary generosity. Ethan would simply smile. It all started with a housekeeper who refused to fail a test she never knew she was taking. Years later, when journalists asked Ethan what the best investment of his life had been, they expected him to mention stocks, technology, or real estate. Instead, he answered with a smile that reached his eyes. "The greatest investment I ever made wasn't in business. It was learning to trust a good heart. Because in the end, wealth isn't measured by what you keep. It's measured by the lives you lift. And sometimes, the richest person in the room isn't the one with the biggest bank account. It's the one whose kindness leaves the greatest legacy." If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Kindness of Power and join us for more inspiring stories that remind us that compassion, honesty, and hope can still change the world. And if this message stayed with you, share it with someone who could use a little encouragement today. Thank you for watching. And remember, the smallest act of kindness may become the biggest turning point in someone else's life.